wanted to take a second to have a conversation with you about the communication process. There's a lot that goes into communication, so we could spend hours talking about it, but I want to keep this under 5 minutes or less. So when we look at the communication process, there's a variety of different models that illustrate how that process takes place. So for this conversation, we're going to focus on Wilbur Schramm's model of communication, which is conveniently labeled the Schramm model. A little bit of background on Wilbur Schramm, which the slide should be popping up now. Wilbur Schramm was born in 1907 and lived until 1987. He was an American scholar of mass communication and played an important role in founding and shaping the discipline of communication. So he knew a little bit about communicating, right? Let's take a look at his model. And here we have a rendition of Schramm's model. I'm going to give you a quick little outline of it, and we'll discuss briefly each of the steps in his model. So on the left-hand side of the model, we have the sender, or what's labeled here as the encoder. On the right-hand side, we have the receiver, or the decoder. Let's follow the communication process. As that encoder or that sender gets ready to send their message, they have to start packing it up in a nice little package to try to figure out what they want to send. So what do we want to communicate? What information do we want to transmit to that other person? We're going to pack it up, and before we get ready to send it, we have to decide, how are we going to send it? So what medium are we going to use? Are we going to just talk about it like we're doing now? Am I going to text it? Am I going to write it down? Am I going to use a visual communication, maybe some signage? So there's a lot of things that we could use. Once we decide on that medium, so that proper way that we want to communicate it, we're going to send that message, right? So as that message is moving forward towards that person that we're speaking to, it's passing through what we think is dead space, but it's not really dead space. It's interference. It could be something as simple as white noise in the background, distracting that individual, or maybe there's a communication barrier of some type. So maybe it's a language barrier. It could be a generational barrier. It could be jargon, maybe unique terminology that we're using that the other person's not familiar with. So there's a lot that goes into that, right? As that message passes through that barrier or that interference, it's then received by the person that we're trying to speak to or that we're trying to communicate with. Now that person, they have this nice lovely package and they're going to start unpacking it. But as they're unpacking it, when they're reviewing the information, they're not just looking at it for what it is, they're looking at it with their own experiences, their own unique biases even. So everything that makes them them. So if they had a bad day and they're reading this message with no context, it could be misinterpreted. It could be something that you meant as a good intention, but now it's upsetting them. So they're unpacking this, they're interpreting your message, and now to make sure they're understanding it correctly, one of the most important parts of communication, I would argue, is the feedback. So now they have to repack this to make sure they're understanding it correctly. They're putting it in their own little package and they're going to send it back, which now it has to pass through that interference and that communication barrier. And don't forget, they had to decide how they're going to communicate it back to you. Are they going to pick up the phone and call you? Are they going to text it to you? Again, there's a lot of different communication mediums or avenues we can choose from. So as that message passes through that interference, maybe running into new barriers, new issues that are preventing it from being received correctly, it's now back in your hands. So now this package, which originally had your content in it, has something a little different, and you have to unpack it, and this whole communication process begins again. Seems simple, but there's a lot of things that go into it, right? And remember, we could unpack each of these steps even further, which we might do on future videos. But let's continue to move on here. Now, John Maxwell, who's a leadership expert and communication expert, he says that if you want to succeed, you must learn how to connect with people. And that's what communication does. You figure when we're trying to address somebody or address an audience, we really want to know who we're speaking to so we can tailor that message or that content. And in his book, Everyone Communicates, Few People Connect, which I happen to have right here, we get into detail about how to truly connect and really refine our communication skills. So I'm hoping you join me on our next mastermind session where we can discuss finding common ground so that we can keep our communication simple and capture people's interest. maybe even try to inspire the people that we're speaking with, and stay authentic in our relationships. But again, thank you guys for listening. I hope to see you on our next mastermind call. Enjoy the rest of your day.